Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to a very chilly November edition of Molten Music Monthly. It's flippin' freezing, I don't know about you, but I'm going to keep my jumper on probably for most of this one, so apologies if you're looking forward to the shirt, or maybe it'll come out later if I get nice and warmed up by being animated. But before we start, I would just like to throw out a quick thank you to everyone who sent in their best wishes to me last month when I was struck down by the old COVID. It's really appreciated and really nice to feel the care and concern that people expressed. That was awesome. Thank you for that. I'm more or less alright. So let's crack on. So this month, Mosaic have more 1U up their sleeve, and Xodes, Xodes, have got fascinating ways to make it easier to get into that sort of thing. Rossum brings back the SP1200. Cherry Audio pop out a 4-way. Dreadbox get all Dysphonia. Roland Boutique up a couple of classics. MOK make a less cool synth. The Pill will pump your side chains. Stem Modular get comparative. Expert Sleepers will purse your phone. Midiphy do hardware matrix sequencing. IK Multimedia pumps up the sampled synth content. Moog adds a new dimension. The M2 synth hopes to make big formats affordable. And BLEASS Alpha makes it to the desktop. But first, teenage engineering, right? That crazy bunch of crazies who invent and design crazy things and then charge an arm and a leg for them are back with yet another crazy design. But no, this one I really quite like. It's called the Computer One, and all it is a computer case. Now, because they're designers, because they can't help themselves but pour out their energies and their enthusiasm into the idea of concepts and design and stuff, when they build themselves computers to work on, they kind of like to design a case for them, which is completely normal. I think that's fine. I think that's great. And they've been doing this over the years, and they thought, well, you know, these are quite nice. Why don't we let other people have a go? We could charge an arm and a leg for them. Yay, everybody goes. So they have. And it's quite a delightful thing. It's at the moment, a lovely orange, I have to say. It looks like it's made out of the same material they made the POM 400 and their little modular synthesizer thing. And you have to bend it into shape yourself. It's pretty cool. It takes a mini ITX board. You can build yourself a little mini PC in there. It does have room for a proper 2-slot size graphics card. So if you can find a graphics card anywhere in the world, then you could potentially put one in there. But otherwise, it's a great little, cool looking, fantastic, handled, stick it on your desktop. Oh my goodness, that looks fabulous type computer case. Set it back a couple of £100, which is what you'd usually spend on a super duper hyper light up, fully insulated and thermally sorted out type Uber case. But this is teenage engineering, so you get a little bit for your money, but what you do get is very cool and very nice. So I like that. Thank you. Now the 1U Eurorack format. Now this is an interesting, evolving space that I think is going to take up a lot more of our time over the next year or two. It just seems to be, expanding and about to pop into a bit of an explosion. Now I'm going to do a video all about 1U Eurorack very, very soon, because I have been fascinated by it and I've found lots of weird information, and I want to pull that together so that I can understand it and then throw that out to you. However, that's for another day. At the moment, I'm going to speak about two things. I'm going to speak about Mosaic, and I'm going to speak about Xodes, Xodes. Xodes, I don't know how they call themselves. X with an Odes on the end. Let's go for Xodes. I'm going to go with. Yeah. Anyway, Mosaic is a company. I believe they're part of Qubit Electronics, and they have been purely focused on creating 1U tiles Mosaic. Do you see what they did there? Yeah, and they're pretty cool and pretty funky, pretty interesting, and certainly have the widest range of 1U stuff out there. And they've added a few more to their existing stuff. So I've probably talked about this before. But the new ones, they've already got an entire sort of drum section. They've got a snare drum, bass drum, kick drum. They've got utilities in there. They've got filters and oscillators and other bits and pieces. But now they've added an LFO. They're adding a random source. They're adding a state variable filter and a sample and hold and a little tap button. You can just tap it and it comes out. I mean, the interesting thing about the Mosaic modules is that often 1U is seen as very utility, little things doing little jobs. A little clock here, a mult, for instance, a little mixer, something like that. Whereas Mosaic seem to be putting forward the idea that you could have your whole Eurorack could be 1U, and that's very interesting. But one of the issues surrounding 1U is how do you actually add that to your Eurorack? Well, it's usually built into your case. So, for instance, this case I've got here has a 1U section, strip if you like, of 1U built into it. But that was on request. I requested that, whereas I have other cases that don't have any 1U in it. I mean, most of the driving force behind 1U comes from IntelliGel, because they've designed the 1U format to a degree. There's a discussion to be had there, which I'll have at another time. So a lot of other manufacturers are adopting the IntelliGel way of doing a 1U, and so there's all sorts of strange cross-compatibility and stuff going on there. So essentially, people with an IntelliGel Eurorack case will have 1U already to go. And so unless you have that in there, unless you've decided before you're even building your modular to have the case to have 1U in it, you're a bit stuck. Or are you? So this is where the Xodes thing came in. You see this over here? Did you spot that? My little 1U patch. This is a couple of 1U modules in a 3U to 1U converter. Do you see that? Can you see that? You probably can't see it quite so well because the modules are in the way. But essentially I've got these two strips here and across here, and this sits in to a regular Eurorack case. Like so, and allows me to put in 3 little rows of 1Us. Why on earth would I want to do that? Well, that is also a good question, and something which I will cover in a lot of depth, I imagine, when I do my video on it. But very simply, I think the most obvious thing for this particular setup is that I just wanted a drum machine which was in this orientation rather than vertical in 3U, and the same with this quantizer. Those were two things that I wanted to get in a better format that was presenting itself to me for a live performance rig. So that was my interest in this particular case. Now, Xodes do these adapters down to about 10 HP, I think, so you can just put in a little one and have 3 little 10 HP 1U tiles, which could have all sorts of utilities and bits and pieces in them. So it's a brilliant way, and not an expensive way either, to add some 1U tiles to your existing 3U Eurorack. Brilliant. Love it. So I'm going to be doing a lot more on this very soon as I stick it into my performance case and start working out what the heck is going on with all of that. But something else I did see, which I haven't had time to look up, is someone has created like a 1U skiff. 1U little skiff which you can bolt onto an existing 3U skiff just to have like a little sit-up 1U rack space, which I think is really nice. It's an idea that I've had myself that I've not been able to realise, of course. But I think, as I say, 2022 is going to be the year for 1U. That's fascinating. So look out for that. But anyway, what was I saying? Mosaic, new tiles. The Xodes thing is an adapter to get your 1U into your 3U system. Is it worthwhile yet is the question, because are there really enough interesting 1U modules? Maybe. I don't know at the moment. I mean, Mosaic, as I say, do a lot, and they're great, but most of those sorts of modules I already have in 3U. So it's a question of working out what's useful in that. What is it about that format which is going to be better than 3U? Is it not? I don't know. That's the question. That is the question. So there, we're going to start off with the question, and I'll stop rambling and we'll move on to the next item. Now, in 1984, EMU Systems released the SP1200 drum machine sampler. It was designed by Dave Rossum, and he has brought it back from the avenues of history into today and is re-releasing it. It's interesting because last year he was doing some reconditioned ones. He like found some old ones at the back of a warehouse, fixed them up, added a few bits, expanded a few bits, sold them for huge amounts of money, and people lapped them up. So he probably thought, yeah, there's probably a business idea here. Why don't we produce a bunch more and see if we can get people to take those too? So they have. And it's awesome. The SP1200 was a whole 8-channel sampler, and it had about 10 seconds worth of sampling time. Not that it couldn't do longer, it's just that the price of RAM at the time was extraordinary, and so that's as much as they could afford to put in it and fit into the case. So the new one has now been expanded, I think, to the whole 20 seconds. Oh yes. And you can kind of see how the MPC styles drum machine sampler kind of evolved from this, because although it doesn't have all the pads, it does have 8 trigger pads and 8 sliders for level, and you could run it as an 8-track drum machine. Those classic samples from all those hits from all those artists that you'll probably know better than me. It came with an epic floppy drive in the front for your tiny weeny samples, whereas now they've replaced that with an SD card. They've also revamped the outputs out the back to give you more of those, and they've added hardware controls for the 2 filters that are inside. So in some ways they've not done very much. They've tried their best to keep it as an authentic an SP1200 experience as possible, down to the crunchy sound and the crunchy interface and the tiny screen, but they have done a few little enhancements just to make it more tolerable, I suppose, in today's way of doing things. It's going to cost you $4,000, and you need to get in the queue because there aren't going to be that many. Cherry Audio, who have been doing wonders with their virtual instruments of late, have had a go at the ARP Quadra. ARP Quadra is an odd beast, I think. It's kind of a weird hybrid organ slash synth slash string machine or something. I mean, it looks very much like a synthesizer. It looks like an ARP Odyssey. It has that kind of physical presence about it with lots of sliders, lots of big colourful splashes of orange and these blue and green buttons. You know, it definitely looks the part, but when you dig under the surface you realise it's actually something slightly different, slightly odd, but undoubtedly vintage and interesting to everybody these days. So what is it? Well, Quadra, 4 layers. It's got 4 sound engines essentially, which you combine, as I say, a little bit like an organ. It's like having an old organ where you'd switch in different sections. You'd have the brass section and then the lead section, the bass section. It almost needs like a CR78 drum machine just sort of tangoing and cha-charing in the background in order to give it its full organ flavour. But anyway, what you do get is a string machine, so like a Selena strings, so there's analog sort of filling strings in the background, and then you've got a bass synth with a couple of small controls, a lead synth with a couple of controls, and then a polysynth. So you got sort of the strings, then a polysynth stabby thing, bass line, and the lead. Those 4 things kind of put together. It's like it's got a split personality. In some ways it's bringing an entire workstation of sounds, and in others it hasn't really got any clue as to what it is or what it's doing. But again, apparently people really love it. Really love it. I've never understood the string machine fascination. That's, you know, I mean, I like a good warm pad like like most people, but no, string machines have never really done it for me. So I'd rather have a bass synth or a lead synth or a polysynth rather than this kind of weird squashed together hybrid thing that just doesn't really seem to have enough controls for anything. But then that's just me. Next up is the Dreadbox Dysphonia. Now, sadly, they didn't seem to do anywhere near enough of these. They seem to have already sold out. I'm not even sure if they're doing any more. But it's a great little synth. It's just a little desktop synthesizer that's completely modular. It's not semi-modular. There's no background stuff going on. You've just got these little modules, and you're going to have to patch the whole thing together to make it make sound. And it sounds great. Comes as a kit. I had to build this one. I've done a video on the build. Go and check that out, because it's quite a good, solid build. You're not having to do much to do with the components. You're mostly soldering the front panel, so it's pretty good for beginners, because it's all big chunky bits of soldering, which is nice. And then you put the whole thing together, you have a bit of a headache over the calibration and tuning the bits and pieces, and then you have a lot of fun playing with it as either a desktop synthesizer or it'll fit in your Euro rack. Brilliant. And you've got like 13 different modules in here. It's totally brilliant, including a digital modulator, which can be all sorts of different things you can feed in there. It's also got an echo taken from the Erebus, I believe. You've got a whole bunch of waveforms out on the oscillator. You've got 3 VCAs. I mean, crikey. A couple of envelopes, lots of stuff going on. LFO, 2 filters. It's like really over-featured for a little desktop synthesizer, which is great. More stuff. It's not expensive either. I mean, okay, you could probably buy a couple of little Behringer synths or something, but this, you get to build it yourself, you get to enjoy all of that. It's proper modular, no messing about. Great job. I really hope they make more, because you know, the video I've done on it's been really popular. People are saying, oh no, I wish I could have had one, that would have been great. So I hope, Dreadbox, if you're out there, that you decide to do a whole load more, because these, I think people like them very much and do other things like this. It's great. Great. I would like to have a go on the Nymphus at some point, by the way, if anybody wants to send me one of those. Anyway, the Dreadbox Dysphonia. If you can find one, they're awesome. Now, I kind of got the impression that the Roland Boutique thing was all over. I thought they'd kind of gotten over it and decided that that maybe people don't want tiny things in tiny boxes. And they might want something else. But no, apparently not. So Roland have just pumped out a couple of new ones. One is based on the JD800. So JD800, massive, isometric, weird shaped and angles and things. They've taken all of that and squeezed it down into the boutique size one. And then similar with the JX-8P. Enormous synthesizers pulled down into this tiny format. However, what I think is great about these particular ones is that Roland seems to have learnt from previous, or has been listening to feedback from customers, mostly along the lines of, core blue neck is really fiddly. So, even though the form factor remains, they seem to have taken steps to try to make it better. First thing they've done, they've removed the pitch and modulation strips that are on the left hand side, giving you more room generally, and because those sorts of things are probably going to be in your controller keyboard, it makes sense not to have those there taking up real estate. The other thing they've done is they've tried to make the sliders just as big as possible, to the point that on the JD800 version, with JD-08 as they're calling it, they've actually added 4 larger faders that you can map to any of the controls within it, giving you some proper performance controls, because a lot of them within the boutique format are just really, really small. You could get to them, of course, but having these 4 separate faders gives you that little bit more leeway, a little bit more creativity. You can get to it easier, I think. On the JX-08, which is a little one of the 8P, there's less controls, because the original didn't have any controls at all. It just had a tiny little screen and a bunch of buttons. It's very much a membrane synthesizer designed to just melt your brain when it came to programming. So anything that Roland could give us on the boutique front panel is a godsend as far as that's concerned. And so you've got a whole load of sliders covering all the usual sorts of bits. So it looks like a decent little boutique synthesizer. Of course, it comes with the sounds, those polyphonic synthesizer warmth and loveliness of the JX-8P, which gives you access to all that JD800 wavetable goodness. Now, they've included a 2-channel sequencer, which gives you the impression that it could be bi-timbral, which I believe it is. You've got 2 layers of sound, and this is true for both of them, which is quite exciting, and has pumped up the polyphony beyond the usual 4 notes that you've had before on boutiques, up to more, I think, 24 even on some of them, which is great. So it's really expanding on the idea of putting the fullness of that synthesizer in the box and giving you a bigger space in which to play. I think they look great. I think it's still a shame about those terrible K25M keyboards. What a waste of time. There's a guy, right, the Roland guy, doing the video, and he's got that little weeny, pathetic, crappy little keyboard attached to it, and he's really trying hard. He's like almost sweating, trying to get some kind of lively sounding performance out of that pathetic little keyboard. But you know, he really gives the impression that it's possible to play that thing, and it's not possible. It is not possible to play that thing. I mean, unless you're used to playing on a Fisher-Price piano, then it's probably gonna feel right to you. But anyone with any kind of feel in their fingers at all, if you know, assuming you have feeling in the ends of your fingers, then you're not gonna like K25M. Don't get it. I know it looks nice. It's a nice little combination. Don't get it. It's not the answer that you're looking for. Better off getting any other keyboard in the world. All right? Now, the Wave Razor is one of my favourite synthesizers ever. Not necessarily because of its sound, but because it just looks so phenomenal. I mean, the MOK Wave Razor is an extraordinary looking synthesizer. I mean, it sounds awesome also, but the look of it, the visualization, those lines getting in there, moving things about, the animation, all of it, just absolutely sublime. And then they come along with the Miniraze, and you think, oh right, cool, sort of like a simpler cut down version of the Wave Razor. No, not really. This apparently is supposed to be a bit like a mini Moog. And you look at it and go, what? I mean, I guess it has similar synthesizer elements. It's just that on the front end, where Wave Razor was all about this sort of oscilloscope thing in the middle and interesting things moving about, this is just blue and red, a panel of blue and red going at you, and you're going, where the heck is where is anything? Is this an oscillator? I don't know. And you choose to click on something and you get a huge page of stuff you can choose from, every single oscillator sound in the planets, or every single waveform, every single this, and you go, well, what happened to the gorgeous interactivity of Wave Razor? It's kind of been, you know, everything that was engaging about Wave Razor has been kind of sucked out of it, and you're left with this page of text, largely text. With some buttons. I mean, there are knobs, of course they are, but there's lots of lines, and and the text is difficult to read because it's in a very cool font, which is a little bit too cool when it's all you've got to rely on to tell you what the heck is going on. So I'm slightly baffled by Miniraze because I love the sound and the idea, and it still takes on the concept of splitting these waveforms and having these two things collide into each other to create interesting tones. It's just that it's not as engaging, it's not as animated, it doesn't pull you in, you can't explore it quite so well. You're kind of thinking, what am I doing, and where is the sound coming from, and which bit is making the sound? I don't really know. I don't know. Big pages of selections. Goodness me, it's just I don't know. So, MOK, if you're out there, I mean, if you listen to these sorts of things, I would say it has the potential of being something awesome. But there's a disconnect somehow between what is going on the screen and the sound that you're hearing. I can't quite pull those two things together yet. Maybe it's just me. I need to spend more time with it. But I would just say that Wave Razor, phenomenal. Miniraze, I don't know. You seem to have dropped the ball somehow, and I find that frustrating, because you're capable of such awesome things, and you just need to throw some of that visualization, I think, back into Miniraze somewhere. Something has to put it together, otherwise it's just a little bit tricky. But why don't you out there go and have a look, go and download the demo or something and see what you think, because maybe it's only me that's baffled by it. Maybe it's my love for Wave Razor which is colouring my opinion of Miniraze. I don't know, but in either way, it does sound great. It has some great potential in there. It's just I'm just slightly baffled by the interface. System46 from Industrialectric. What the heck is this? It got sent through, punted to me from the guitar department, going, I think this is for you. I went, oh, okay. So I had a look. Oh yeah, it looks nice. Oh, it's a synth, great. Oh, oscillator, great. Yeah, good. Yeah, all right. So in the demo video, there's sort of like there's sound going on, and then someone pushed this bypass button from bypass into in, and it just sort of went from, so there's something going on to and it just went nuts, and you have this noise and this stuff and hiccup, and it's like, so interesting. It's like some kind of demon being released from itself when you hit the bypass button. I thought, well, this can't be it, can it? Or at least this can't be all of it. So I sort of found another demo video, and it's like going tinkle tinkle. In fact, I think the guy had one of those sort of tongue drums going on, tinkle 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 tinkle, then turn it out of bypass. So yeah, I think that's what System46 is about. It's about taking sound and totally destroying it in one way or another. And reading the comments under the videos, people go, oh wow, this is awesome, man. So people tend to enjoy that sort of thing. I'm not sure I enjoy that sort of thing, but there are people who do, and that's nice. Well, essentially it's an analog oscillator which creates tones in response to an audio input. So you could plug a guitar in, or you could plug the output of anything into it, and it'll think about it, and it will analyze the input signal. It'll gather and extract envelopes and sound and tonal possibilities, and then just completely stuff them up each other's arses. So it spends all this time thinking about it, and then just comes out with a ah. But it's drama. It's what it is. Drama, excitement, craziness. Some kind of sound generation in relation. It's probably musically relevant to whatever it is you put in. Fantastic. System 46. Now, sidechaining and ducking is one of those things which I think is becoming more important to me in terms of my performance rig and stuff, because I am finding things are getting lost. And so the idea of kind of pumping the volume of everything to allow like a kick drum through or a bit of snare through or something else rhythmically into the mix is attractive, because those sorts of things can get lost. Very easy to get lost in a live performance mix. When you're mixing in post-production, then you can fix those sort of things and set those sort of levels and mess that stuff about. But in live performance, having a ducking system which drops the volume of one thing in response to some kind of trigger or gate, and then it comes back up again to allow something else through. Do you see what I mean? You do this through sidechain compression, and that's what the pill pedal is about. Now again, it's a pedal. I don't mean to do pedals, but sometimes pedals are useful in this environment, and this one particularly. So the pill stereo is an analog ducking pedal. So how does it work exactly? Well, I get confused about these things, but I think what you do is you plug in the main part of your mix into it, and that then comes out of it. And then you plug in a trigger from your drum machine, for instance, which is mirroring your kick drum or something of that nature, so that every time the kick fires, the trigger also fires. That triggers the pedal. The pedal goes, oh, it just pulls it down a little bit. The sound from that kick, this is all happening instantaneously, goes boom out of the mix, and then the attack release thing of the pill has then gone back up, and so you get this pull down boom and this pull up again, pull down boom, pull up. Is that how you explain ducking? I don't know, maybe. That'll do. But that's kind of the idea, and it allows the drum track to punch through a mix which can be crowded. It also can, depending on how much you put on, how much you push this effect, it can create like a pumping effect on strings or on large synths or on guitars. So you're going sort of vroom, vroom, and every time it comes back, that kick comes through. You'll know it when you hear it, right? But anyway, so the pill is a pedal which does that. There was a mono one. They've now released a stereo one, which is probably better for synthesizers and mixes and that sort of thing. And it looks flipping fantastic. They're all hand built by a bloke called David, so there's not exactly many of them on the ground, but they look like a fantastic little solution to really sorting out how big you sound on stage. STEM Modular, we saw them at one of the online events in 2020, I seem to think. They were making modules out of bits of old bamboo and things lying about the place, and the idea being they were cheap and simple and great for education, hence the STEM name. And they've been great, and they've carried on doing that, and they've started to develop new things and other bits and pieces, and one of their new modules is the Quad Comparator. Now, they were originally going to design some kind of drum gate sequencer, but they felt this was more educationally interesting, which it is, because a comparator, what it does, you've got 4 channels of it, and it creates like a window in which something will happen. So you've got a window that's got a high and a low voltage, and once the voltage that's coming in gets into that window, it generates a gate for an output. So if you've got like a random voltage going in, every now and again it will hit into that window, and that will produce a gate or a trigger output, and that you can trigger your percussion in your drum or your envelope or your clock or some other thing with that. And you've got 4 of those running alongside each other. Or you could set them all to different little windows, so the voltage coming in could trigger different things and create different patterns. It's really interesting. What an interesting way to create gate patterns. It's like extracting something from a melody, or extracting gates from your sequence. Yeah, fascinating. It's a good looking module. They do it with a sort of a black PCB front as well as a bamboo front, if you're not particularly into the whole bamboo aesthetic, which is a good idea, I think. But they remain nicely fun and nicely affordable. So Expert Sleepers have of late been producing some analog modules, which has been very interesting. And the latest one is called the Persephone. Persephone, something along those lines. And what is it? Well, it's a VCA. But it's not just a VCA, it's a VCA that's packed full of JFET goodness. JFET is some kind of circuit of some kind, which is often used in guitar pedals, which brings some saturation, some overdrive, some warmth to the signal. So initially it looks like it's like a dual VCA, but it's not. It's actually a single VCA, but it has a couple of inputs, a couple of CV controls, and then this post and pre-VCA saturation, overdrive, JFET crunchiness that you can apply to the signal, and it ends up sounding really nice. You can stick anything through it and just add in that bit of crunchiness without it being a full-on distortion, without it being something really crunchy and nasty. It just brings in a nice level of grunginess to a sound. One of the nice features that I think is particularly spectacular is that it can detect 0 crossing points. What that means is that it's never gonna click. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I have this problem with VCAs all the time, is that what I would like is just to have a signal going into a VCA and have a gate open and close that VCA so that it can be a gated signal coming through. And that sounds great in theory, but in practice, it tends to make it click. It tends to give you this click at the front, which can be awfully frustrating. And in order to remove that, you need to just add in an envelope. Just adding an envelope and having the gate trigger the envelope, which then opens the VCA, sorts it out. It removes that click. It just puts in enough delay so that you don't quite get that edginess to it. Now, with a Persephone, they've built in a detector for that, so that never happens. So you can gate this. Just stick a gate straight in and it will work without that front end click. Totally brilliant. Every VCA should have one. It's how they should be as a standard from now on in. Okay, it's really coming down out there now, and it's even feeling colder, so I'm going to keep my jumper on. But anyway, if you can hear me over the sound of the rain, I'm going to talk about the Midiphy MatriX. I mean, this is a work of art. It's a matrix sequencer. A matrix sequencer is essentially a grid onto which you put points, and those points go bing, 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 as the timeline goes across and loops across. It's a brilliant thing. The sort of thing you find on an iPad app. The Yamaha Tenori, was it called, used to do that. It's immensely satisfying, easy. Just choose a scale and it's always going to sound nice, and it pings off these little pings. Anyway, Midiphy have done this in hardware and it's beautiful. Massive control board thing, all these wonderful mechanical switches that are all internally illuminated and can be anything. The whole thing shimmers with colour and excitement, and you can, at a very simple level, have 16 steps going around, and you can tap it in order to sequence. You know, live on the fly. You're not trying to mouse it about the place, or you're not playing with a computer. You are just sequencing on the fly with your fingers, feeling your way through it. Magnificent. But that's not the half of it. It's much bigger than that. You can zoom all over the place and have kind of as many steps as you like. You can zoom out, you can zoom into finer detail, to finer and finer resolution, so you could have like 16 steps within a step that you've zoomed in order to program. Now, this thing doesn't stand by itself. It's an expansion to an existing sequencer called the first one is called the Seek V4 Plus, and the other one's called the Loop A, and these are quite impressive looking desktop units, again with mechanical keys and knobs and stuff, that you can use to create sequencers. So you can create a sequence with this thing, MIDI is all about MIDI, or you can add the flipping matrix onto the side, whoop, and get busy with that. I mean, it's a fantastic looking thing. It does far more than I could possibly explain at the moment, but the physicality of that to create sequences is immense. Just fantastic. It only comes as a kit. It will cost you about $1,000, and you have to build the thing yourself. In fact, you have to source a load of the components yourself. You only get the main specialist ingredients like the case and the mechanical keys and that kind of thing. All the other bits and pieces you're going to have to find and build yourself, and you've got to have that other sequencer as well. So there's a lot to it, but it's an incredibly impressive piece of work. Looks great. IK Multimedia have released Syntronik 2. Now, Syntronik was their attempt at doing a massive collection of synthesizers. They sampled synthesizers from all over the place. Old ones people found under the stairs, bits of old crap, they pulled those out, sampled the heck out of them, and then combined that sample library with kind of an analog moduled synthesizer section. So filtering and modulation and effects, that kind of thing. All of that modelling side that they do, they stuck that onto the end of the sample side. So you get this combination, this hybrid of sampling and modelling in order to create quite an interesting interactive sound experience. So it's much more than just like a sample pack for Contact or something like that. You get this basis of sounds, and then you can apply synthesis techniques to it that are modelled directly on the old hardware. So it is like a relatively authentic experience, I think. And all of it is packed within this sort of interface, which in some ways hampers it a bit, because they all have to fit within this same space. I mean, IK Multimedia do this with their other stuff, like Sample Tank, like Amplitude. You know, you end up in this single interface where everything, regardless of what it is, has to fit in this same space. And that has its advantages for familiarity and keeping things simple, I suppose. But you do lose some of the difference between the synthesizers because of that, I feel. But regardless, they've really gone to town on the interfaces this time, so they do all look rather splendid. Although, one of the other things they do, they really like their presets. So they make thousands of these things and stick it to you in the library browser, and you can spend the rest of your life trying to work your way through these presets. So my advice with the Syntronik thing is to pick a synth. Just load up that synth and play with that for a bit. Enjoy that. Otherwise you'll get lost in the masses and masses of preset possibilities, because now you can combine synthesizers in two ways. You can layer up into multis, I think up to 4 different synthesizer sounds and entire things all laid up in a big thing, split across your keyboard, all that kind of rigmarole. Or you can actually use individual parts from each synthesizer, so oscillators, for instance, from different sources, and build a synthesizer that way in a new sort of synthesizer editor kind of jobby. Very interesting. And potentially lets you combine things that have never been combined before. So there's 33 synths in here now, along with a lot of stuff you've probably never heard of, have never seen and never wanted to hear. But they are there, and they're good to play with, and you can get it in 3 different versions, so you can just like dip your toe in the water with a handful of synths, maybe just 1,000 presets, something like that. Or you can go the whole hog and have 500,000, or no, 500,000, no, about 5,000 presets and 210 gigabytes worth of sound content. Moog have released a new version of their Animoog. Animoog is an iPad app, iOS app, I suppose. It was released 10 years ago and was probably the best sounding thing on the iPad at the time. Just great, and remains to be just great. It's a wavetable synthesizer. You had a few voices of polyphony in there. You had a sort of a touch pad keyboard. But of course, this is through the glass of an iPad, so whatever. But it looked great. You had this oscilloscope thing going on, and you could create modulation in there by travelling from one place to another and affecting the filters and stuff. Great. Animoog's always been good. They've released a new version called Animoog Z, or Animoog Z, I suppose, for our American cousins, and it pushes it out into a 3D space. So rather than having a 2D oscilloscope, which you're messing about with to create modulation, you've now got a 3D one where you can go in all three directions. And as you do that, you are morphing through wavetables, you're morphing through timbres, and you're also potentially affecting filters and modulation, all that sort of thing too. It's great. I've done an entire review of it on my iPhone, just the iPhone version, which is a bit fiddly, let's face it, but I've done an entire review of that on the channel, so do go and check that out. But in summary, sounds flipping awesome, great stuff. Shame it doesn't look as cool and vintage as the first one. M squared synth. Yes, M squared synth. This is a big fat modular thing, but interestingly, the idea behind this is to create a 5U modular. So that's the big format, similar to the Moog unit, but it's actually done in a slightly different format, but the size is about the same. But the idea is to create a 5U format which is portable, would you believe, and affordable. Both of those things seem to be extraordinary when it comes to 5U. So they've created these pods, but all of the modules are analog, but they're also low profile. So rather than having, because some of the oscillators in 5U are just this deep, and they have to go in these enormous cabinets that you're never going to take anywhere unless you've got a forklift truck. So part of what they're trying to do with this is to make them smaller, lighter, so you can fit them into a smallish case, and go with that, and you've got an entire modular synthesizer, patching on proper patch cables, proper 1/4" jacks and all that kind of thing, benefiting from the size of the knobs and the spacing and all that, and yet not being any more really expensive than Eurorack. Very interesting. So they've launched on Kickstarter, and you get a basic System 10, which has 9 modules in it, and that's about $1,000, I think, which is pretty amazing. But then you can expand it and add different pods to it, expanding the system, expanding to more and more modules, and you can go up to, there's a System 80 that's got 63 modules in it, and that's $6,500. So it's all a bit of a sliding scale, but it looks spectacular. It looks very, very straight. It looks very serious. This is a proper synthesizer. There's no madness in here, no crazy zany creative choices. No, straightforward, down the line. This is what this is going to be all about. But to have that size of format in a cabinet that's not going to overwhelm the entire room, I think is really interesting. Very interesting indeed to see how well that goes. And also their goal on Kickstarter is very, very modest. I don't think they have any problem reaching it, which means this thing will exist and people will have it in their hand to be making music with it potentially. There's nothing stunning in there that you go, oh wow, that's a really new idea. The idea really is making it more accessible, making it fit into a studio better, and making high quality 5U modules that are not going to break the bank. I think that's the idea more than anything. And finally we have the BLEASS Alpha. BLEASS Alpha synthesizer, which is a great little synthesizer for the iPad, which has now made it to the desktop. It's always good when that happens. It sort of says to me that this synth is good enough to make it to the desktop. Do you know what I mean? Because iPad synths can feel a little bit like, it's all right, it's all right. Quite enjoyable, quite a bit of fun and all that, but not terribly, terribly serious. However, I think when they get good enough, they can find their way to the desktop, and that opens them up to a whole other world. Now, what's interesting about the BLEASS Alpha synth is that the interface is very much built for touch, and that means it's a broad, clear, and colourful, engaging interface. So it's not going to be like a Rob Paven synthesizer where you've got 1,000 knobs onto a single screen or to a single GUI and you're mousing around and all of that. No. Instead, you've got pages of stuff, which is not always everyone's cup of tea. Some people like to have everything out. But this is very much page and tab based, and that means that each section is very, very clear. Now, there's one thing that he did in here which I particularly like, which is that they left the envelope where they're supposed to be. Because often you get, an oscillator page, filter page, envelope page, LFO page, and so on. And that's natural, that's normal, but you're forever flicking between them because you need to do things across pages, if you know what I mean. So what BLEASS have done is on the oscillator page, they've left the amplitude envelope right there on the side. and it looks great. It's got I mean, it's you can tell that it comes from a touch environment, but that's no bad thing when you're talking about clarity and being able to see things. So you've got the amplitude envelope right there next to the oscillators, and then on the filter page you've got the filter envelope right there too. So you're not having to dig around to find the things that you are going to be using together all the time, and that's really, really nice. Other than that, I mean, it has all the usual sort of synthesizer stuff in, but I do really appreciate the interface. I appreciate the colourful nature of it all, and I think it could do really well. Always annoyed by the difference in price between the app, which is like $15, and the desktop version, which is $60. Why? Why? Is it just because you know we'll pay it? It just seems cruel to me. So that'll do for this month, I think. I think that's plenty. Plenty probably I haven't talked about, and there's plenty more to come. What will we squeeze in by the end of the year, do you think? I don't know. So what have we got coming up? Well, coming up, if you haven't seen it already, I just did this marvellous video on modding, it's down here, that's why I'm looking over here, of modding a pair of Arturia rack brute cases into like a live performance rig. So I'm going to have a lot of that, a lot of focus on that coming up, I should think, in videos in the future. What am I doing with that? How is that developing? How is it changing? What modules did I choose? All that kind of stuff. So that's really interesting. Got stuff coming up on the Surface Pro 8, which I've got sitting here. So I've done a video on my first impressions and getting the first things to run, which was pretty good and pretty easy. But now we need to focus on actual performance testing. How many tracks of stuff? How many plugins can it do? What happens when it starts to heat up? Are we going to be getting a glitchy nightmare, or is it going to be something that we can keep under control? That is coming up soon, and I certainly hope to get that done in the next couple of weeks. Also coming up, I've got a video on 1U stuff. What's that all about? That's going to be interesting. I've got reviews on other modules and bits and pieces coming along, including a build of the Bafako Plethora Noise module. I've got a bit of Descartes' Dream. Oh yes, I do. I'm going to have some of that coming along very soon too. And who knows what else might get thrown in there. In terms of live stream this month, shall we ever go this Sunday? This Sunday will be the 5th of December, 8 o'clock, usual place. I'll confirm this during the week. I'll stick up a link and we can all have a bit of a chat. And let's turn that into a chat about our favourite things of the year. Let that one be our yearly roundup. Because I always feel that if I turn my Molten Monthly into a roundup in December, then we miss out on anything new which came out in December. And we should be talking about those sorts of things. So let's have our live stream on Sunday, the 5th of December, 8 o'clock GMT, and let's talk about our favourite stuff of the year. And also I'll have a bit of a play on my new dual Arturia live rig. Yeah, so that'll be cool. And yeah, so in the meantime, I hope you're all well out there, you're staying safe, looking after each other, and in the meantime, go and make some tunes.